I'm going to say we've got a lot of quality here tonight. We don't have a whole lot of quantity, but this is, when the weather forecast today started, I was really scared. We had people calling going, "You going to cancel?" Well, you really can't cancel these kind of things because you can't get a hold of the people that are going to show up. But I'm very pleased with our turnout tonight, and I know John is too. This is going to be dedicated to his new book, Lost Minden. And if you didn't get a copy beforehand, I do have them over here for sale afterward, and he will autograph them for you. Before we go into that, we're going to talk about our next event. It's going to be April 13th, and that's going to be Chrissy and Susan Dietrich are going to talk about their parents, Warren and Sue. Chrissy is for sure.
Susan is too.
Oh, okay. But that should be very interesting. So I know y'all all want to come to that one. And then in May, we don't have a confirmed for sure, do we yet?
Not yet, but we think we're going to get them.
Okay. Can I go ahead and say?
I don't care.
Okay.
They'll have to come.
Okay, then that's all right. We're hoping that the Haynes family will come, and Freddie Louise will come and talk. She says she would. So if you see her, say, "I'm glad you're speaking in May." So she'll get geared up for it. But that will be our last one before the summer break. So it'd be great to get a lot of her history and hear her tell it. And then we need to get you too, Claire. Look at her. You and Luther, y'all need to think on it. You know, this is just such a great way to capture some of our history. And, you know, you think, oh, you know it, but you really don't. You don't know it until you hear it from those families that remember all the stories. And it's so nice to get to capture all that. But going back to John, if it wasn't for John, I don't know how much history we would have captured. And of course, Miss Campbell too. Both of them, and then also John's mom, just such a memory and dedicated to Minden's history and Webster Parish history. All the projects that I've ever done, if it hadn't been for John, I wouldn't have been able to do them. Ghost Walk, especially. I mean, John was like he knew those people, and he could help me write those scripts, and even though we sometimes had the same ghosts, but they played different parts every year, we had rotating ghosts. You know, that to me was I just enjoyed that. I enjoyed learning the history, and you know, because of John and I starting to do that, Gary Jordan over in Shreveport started doing it with the Oaklawn Cemetery. And Gary said when he came over here and saw how we did it, that he realized he was really missing out by not being a character. And so, you know, we've learned a lot about how to tell history and how to preserve history, and it's a ongoing thing. You learn something different every day. But John really doesn't need an introduction because everybody knows him and knows what he's done for Webster Parish, and he is our official Webster Parish historian. So I'm going to go ahead and let you get started.
Y'all, Phil's not going to be happy, but for the sake of not coming over the floor, I'm going to sit when I do this. This is my last back surgery. I'm not no steady person on my feet. So anyway, if I don't project well enough, let me know. Can't hear me in the back at all. We'll go forward with it. But I am amazed. So I told Shelley, and I was sitting, pulled up out here in the car, and I was in here about 5 minutes out there because I kept getting people sending me messages and texts saying, "I'm not able to come. Sorry, I'm not able to come." And I'm going, okay, there's nobody going to be nobody here. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad to have you all here. We are going to look at the latest book from Arcadia called Lost Minden. 180 pictures, so we should be here about 6 hours now. I picked 6 pictures out of each chapter. There's 3 chapters, and so that's what we're going to go through basically. And otherwise, you need to buy the book for it. But as my third book I've done directly for Arcadia, third book directly for Arcadia. I've done 4 companies they own. And it's a new series they've kind of gone into, and they've kind of gone back around. I did Images of America, Minden and Webster Parish 15 years ago. And so they're kind of coming back around to do it again. The theory being on this is capturing things that people will remember that are lost, so that future generations can see them. And that was kind of the purpose of doing the book. I said I'd retire. I quit doing the newspaper column. I wasn't going to do anything else anymore. I didn't have time and capability to do the research properly. And they called and said, would I do this one? And I said, yeah, because those memories are a great thing. So that's why I did the book. And you're going to get more of that on the next slide here. But for right now, the cover slide is the interior of Abraham Dow's store. Now, one of the things I learned is that as companies get bigger, they get all kind of nice paperwork. You know, I'm a liberal, bleeding pinko Democrat, but I know bureaucracy gets to be a problem. When you get way too much bureaucracy, you get a problem. Arcadia developed bureaucracy in 15 years, so there are a lot of requirements. And we'll come to that on the next slide. But the requirements for the cover picture were you had to have quite a few people in the image, and a lot of them on the right-hand side, because that's the front of the cover. So I sent in 10 possible images. They narrowed it down to 2 and told me to pick between the 2. My personal choice was the other image. The other image it's in the book, of a bookbinding project. Now, that was my personal favorite because my grandmother worked on that project. She's not in the picture. But I would rather put that on the cover, but I don't think anybody in Minden hardly knew about that. Whereas everybody in Minden knew Dow's store. So this was the appropriate cover picture as far as I was concerned. And part of this first part I'm going to talk about is a little bit about that, what pictures got in here for a reason, because that's a very important question. So that is Dow's store around 1920 from what I can tell. Store opened in about 1905. So, you know, you can get a picture of the time frame from that. And you can see a little bit on the side and a little bit on the back of the famous stuff hanging from the ceiling we've always heard about in Dow's store. There's another companion image to it that shows a little bit of that too. But that's what the cover is. It's Dow's store. Now, this is the point where if I was sitting in the audience, I'm going to go, oh, it's time to go to sleep. Why are we going to talk about that? Well, I want to explain, you know, I thought it was a picture book. I want to explain a little bit about this. This is the requirement for the Images of America series, and I want to go through it for 2 reasons. The first one is because of the fact, as I said, I've been collecting these off and on for 15 years. I have like 300 to 350 pictures. Most of those are on Facebook. I told the publisher that before we started. I said, well, I've got them for free on Facebook. You know, they may not want to buy the book. But anyway, so when they said, do you want to do a new book with 180 pictures? I said, sure, not a problem. I already got them in the computer. I'll just pick out my best ones. Well, most of my pictures were scanned in as JPEG, for those of you that are computer people, at the best quality I could get them when I borrowed them from people. And when I sent in my first samples for them to look at, they said, well, you did read the instructions, didn't you? They have to be TIFF format, they have to be at least 300 DPI, and they have to be 8 inches wide. And they can't be JPEGs in the computer that were converted to TIFFs. So essentially that meant if I didn't have the original image, which a lot of them I didn't have, that picture didn't make it. So if you have a picture that you always loved, I probably loved it too, but I couldn't get it in a quality that would go in the book. So that explains some of my picture choices. It also explains the fact that I only came up with 130 pictures. And I had to go to LSUS and get 50 pictures out of the archives over there and use them for the book. So anyway, that's one reason to explain the choices of the pictures. The second reason is slightly more devious. As I told you, I thought I'd retired from doing books, and I think I probably have. But when we finished this one, the next question they wanted to know was, do you think there's other books that can be done there? And I've got two right now on the top of my head. I already talked to Cazo and told them in an interview about these two. The LA Railroad. I mean, that's why my family's here. That's why 1931, a third of the town was the LA Railroad. And with all the news coverage just recently had, the Louisiana Ordnance Plan. Both of those are a likely project for a book of pictures just on those images. So I know somebody out there wants to do that, and here's what you have to have. You know, you'd be glad to put you in touch with the folks. I actually have a couple that's thinking about doing the LA Railroad book, so I think that'd be a good thing. But I wanted to lay out a little bit about how the background of the book, what it involves. And other than that, it's really a no-brainer. If you know how to use the scanner and, you know, you scan it in, put it in the Dropbox, and they pick it up, you go from there. And then they edit it. Talk about that a little bit later. The other problem that I had with the editor, Richard Campbell, had two big arguments. The two biggest arguments that I had were that Thomas Lorraine Campbell and Jim Brown Stewart were women. Oh, that editor did not want to believe it. Don't you need to put something else for the name there? And I didn't realize till the book was published that in that little set-to about Jim Brown Stewart, they ended up spelling Edmund Stewart in a way I've never seen Edmund spelled in my life, and I didn't catch it because we were arguing about that other, and I didn't focus on that part. But anyway, the other thing was a few pictures that are in this book did not meet their standard. And they will let you have up to 5%. So if you get 9 pictures, I had to fight a little bit for the 9 pictures. Some of these 9 are some of the ones that I'm going to show you here tonight because I thought they had to be in for several reasons. But anyway, this is the process. Now let's look at a few of the images in the book. Chapter 1, I entitled The Parallelogram and Beyond. Most of y'all are familiar with the fact that Minden was originally laid out on a parallelogram. That formed the core of the business district. So essentially that's a cute book-sounding way of saying businesses. This was the business district and some that moved outside. And that I wish we did have images from 1835. We don't. That's kind of part of the theory of Lost Minden. We're kind of scattered on pictures before the 1890s, really. I think one of these pictures that you're about to see dates prior to that. I'm not certain. Claire would know more. It's her family, but I don't know for sure if it does. It could possibly be. I know some are from the 90s, but after that, we pick up a lot. But still, some of these buildings were here that far back. So let's look at a few of the images in chapter 1. Now, it's not the best format for this picture because this was one of the substandard pictures, but I felt like this absolutely had to be in there. Because when Minden's town limits were laid out in 1854, Drake Stores, roughly in the same area where the Drake building is, was the center point of the community. Town limits were set a half mile every direction from Drake Store. So when you're going to say you start at the beginning, that's kind of the beginning. Now, we weren't incorporated 20 years after the town was founded, but still, at the time of incorporation, that was used as the center point. So you're kind of looking at the core of downtown. In addition to that, educated guess here, because I don't know. From the dates and the way this store looks, I think this is probably the version that was also used as the headquarters of the occupation troops. The 61st United States Colored Troops, under the command of Lieutenant Charles Graff, a white officer from Illinois, were here from May through December 1865, and they were headquartered in Drake Store, and there were at least 2 court-martials held of soldiers that were stationed here, black soldiers. There was a movie made in the 1990s called The Buffalo Soldiers. And oddly enough, the name of one of the lead characters in that story, one of the Buffalo Soldiers, is actually the name of a soldier that was court-martialed here. And I got all excited when I found the court-martial papers. I said, oh, wait a minute, that movie's got a time amendment. Now they just apparently found the name on the roster of the soldiers and liked it and used it. So there was no connection. He was discharged after he left the unit and didn't stay in the unit. But, again, Blair kind of tells you a little bit about it, and you know, if I'm going to start with the business district, I thought this was kind of a good fit starting image. This one the library had, and I discovered it when I was working for the library, and it amazed me because that's the first time I'd ever seen a picture of Captain Goodwin. Captain Alfred Goodwin, fascinating story. He and his father embarked to the United States when he was 16 or 17 years old. His mother died. They came across, and on the voyage on the way over, Captain Goodwill, teenager Goodwill, kept a journal of his trip, made all these little fascinating illustrations on the side. Pretty good amateur artist. I was amazed. I hope that journal still exists someplace. I was shown it 30 years ago by Robert Roberts Sr., and the last time I talked to the family, it didn't still exist. It was in bad shape. Anyway, they came across, when they got to this country, his father died, and he wandered up here because, Mr. Professor, I'm sorry about this, the Chad family had connections, and he heard the British colony that was here, so Alfred Goodwill came to Mendham, and ended up owning freaking half the parish, if you pardon the expression. You know, Goodwill Road, all the area out there, Goodwill Store. He's parked in his buggy in front of Goodwill Store. Goodwill Store roughly ran from, it's called the Gladney Building, nobody knows that, Service Grocery, Dixie Store from my childhood. It ran between that building and City Drug. And at the time that it was built, it was the largest store in Louisiana. And it was the Walmart of the day, except it had funerals. They did the funerals in there too. Because in fact, when Lenny Widener was lynched in 1895, Sheriff Mims had been warned that if he tried to stop it, they'd get him. So he went to Goodwill Store and hid the coffin while that lynching was taking place, so they wouldn't get him. So anyway, it was a full-purpose, all-service business. Alfred Goodwill's daughter married in the Roberts family that I mentioned. That's where the Roberts came from. Her little girl married into the family of Governor Murphy J. Foster. And her son, Alfred Goodwill's grandson, is our Governor Mike Foster. So that's Mendham's tie to Governor Foster. So this is a pretty important figure in Mendham's history. The only image I ever found that purports to be Goodwill Store, like Shelley said, sometimes we got to take a little exam, a little license here. The picture was taken of him sitting in the buggy, so I'm going to assume it's in front of his store. It seems to match that description. So anyway, there's another picture that I was fascinated by that I got from LSUS that's in the book. Apparently, extended relations. Looks like Easter. There's no explanation with the picture from LSUS. If somebody hadn't pointed out to me to be sure that it was Alfred Goodwill in the picture, all bunch of little children in what would become City Park. So anyway, two interesting pictures of Captain Goodwill. This was the first one. Some of y'all may have eaten here recently. This is the First National Bank. Got this picture from Frank Griffith. Miss him already, but you know, Frank, let's have this picture. This is inside the First National Bank, and that is Frank's dad, B.F. Griffith, standing at the left forefront. I know it's difficult to see, but you know, you can do it anyway. Yeah, Terry had the teller cage put in, the little place where they got the little, to make it carry back to that memory. Interesting, when Terry got this building, we started trying to trace. He wanted originally a list of everything that had been in that building. Good luck. I started going through the newspapers. The bank was there from 1914 to 1931. The building is just over 100 years old. After 1931, it turned around pretty quickly. But I thought this was a really fascinating image of what it was like in one of those banks. I haven't been lately because I can't get a parking place to see if Terry's explored this, but I also found an interesting fact that the first television accessible to the public was in the window of this place when it was Samuel Electric. That's the first TV up for people in Midland City. So the building's had a long history, and it's been repurposed, and it's actually going pretty well. But this was B.F. Griffith and the First National Bank of Midland. And as I said, it did last 17 years. It went out in the bank failure about the same time as the Bank of Webster, and about 2 years before the Bank of Midland, when we went through the bank failures of the Depression. We almost saw this a few days ago. In fact, we probably saw about the equivalent. This is a picture that the first time I ever saw it is when Major DePinger used it in the First Baptist Church history book. It is most likely the 1890s or around 1900. The key to tell is right here. That is the 1872 Webster Parish Courthouse, which was torn down in 1905, so we know it's before 1905. Shelley's asked this question, I've asked this question, I don't know. Shelley's used this before as a good backdrop out here in the museum. These little stands in the street, you can't see them where y'all are from, I realize that, I'm just putting a red dot on nothing up here. But it's almost like little scaffolds, and I'm not sure what it is. When I first looked at it, we had public wells, and there was a public well about where one of those is. To give you a frame of reference, essentially this little building on the end at different times was Charlie Chaff's drugstore. It's now the parking lot on the corner of Pine and Main. Where it used to be when I was a kid, it was Dixon's Variety Store. We had different things there at different times over the years. But so that's where you're looking. You're looking from like the courthouse parking lot back toward town. I don't know what those little scaffoldings are, and I've tried to figure it out, and I don't know. I'm not smart enough. Maybe somebody will. But it's a very interesting image of Midland in the snow, and at a unique point in our history because we were about to modernize. 1901, the Botcall Mill that I'll get to in a minute was going to come. We were going to get electricity, we were going to get natural gas, we were going to get street lights. We were going to become a very different place. We were going to tear down this courthouse and build a new one. So we were going to move ahead. So we're right on the cusp of a big boom time coming when this picture was taken. And although we just had more than I cared for, we got 4 days of teaching to make up with, we missed, which you love being home, but you hate being behind. We don't see that often, usually, so. Okay, familiar image for a lot of folks. For anybody younger than me, where on earth is that? What are you talking about? Back Street, taken from behind the U.S. Post Office. Oh yeah, I'm not bright. I'll go ahead and talk about this. Taken by an FBI agent in August of 1946 when they're investigating the John Jones lynching. I'll leave that alone from now. Got no problems out of that story already, but I'll leave that alone. But anyway, my good pictures of Backstreet came from the FBI. There's several of those in the book. They came with the investigation, took that picture because this was a crime scene. And they were trying to establish what had happened at the jail down there. You can almost in the edge of the picture see St. John's Episcopal Church. But you get a good shot of Abraham Dow, and then further down the street you can see the businesses. There are 2 or 3 other pictures of the businesses taken at the same time, also in the book. But this one stunned me because if you look at the book, you'll see Abraham Dow as I remember it. 1968, 1969, about the time it was torn down, when I can remember really well. And I was stunned and amazed at that paint job. That looked like a nice building. By the time I remembered it, it had seen much better days. It wasn't in the best condition. So I always liked this picture, and it's interesting view from somebody that can't remember the post office. You know, I can tell from the back, I know where it was. And so I always found this picture interesting to see. And again, you start trying to describe this to people, where was it? What are you talking about? Every time I post a picture of the jail on Facebook, I get somebody from the younger generation saying, what kind of church was that? You know, that looked like a castle or something sitting there. Yeah, so it's really kind of odd. Back to my theme of lost Midland for a minute. You know, it is kind of, when you start looking at the time frames, you start being amazed. You think about how long we expect buildings to last. That jail was there 45 years. That's all it was there. Post office was there roughly 45 years. That first courthouse was there 33 years. So we have, I won't say we had a quick trigger. That first courthouse was in bad shape, but we intended to clear things out. So we do have a lot of things that have tended to disappear over time. But this is, the lynching was August 13th, 1946, so FBI was here about the 28th and 30th, so that's the end of August 1946. Get this picture. This one, I mentioned it indirectly a minute ago. This is part of the loading dock at the Midland Lumber Mill. At the time, the third or fourth largest lumber mill in the United States, when it was built with the Bob Call Lumber Company. Along the Illinois Railroad tracks, north of Bio Avenue, the mill quarters were the new section of the old Midland Cemetery. That's where those streets were laid from. That was where the mill quarters were. The mill ponds are still there. Some of them are still there. The mill needed natural gas, so they brought natural gas from Midland. The mill produced electricity that was pumped in there. Pump's not the right word for electricity, but whatever words you would use. So the mill provided the electricity. And that's why I said Midland took a big step forward. We even put in some street lights. The only problem was in May 1918, mill burned down. And for 6 months, Midland had no electricity. And they had to struggle to get by. It had a direct effect later. William Buchanan owned the Bob Call Lumber Company and owned the Illinois Railroad, L&A Railroad. He probably brought the shops of the L&A to Minden. Thank goodness, because that's how I got here. Brought the shops of the L&A to Minden because it felt like we needed something to make up for losing the mill. Didn't put another mill here. But this was a pretty big time industry, and it's another one when you talk about it, people go, where on earth was that? And the best reference you got for a frame of reference is to tell them the old cemetery. Now, somebody's going to know this. I don't know the person. The mill, the cashier's house for the mill, the payroll office for the mill, survived. It was on the west side of High Street Extension. And someone moved it to Allen Drive here a few years ago. Somebody's told me, but I didn't remember the name. And so it still survives. It's been moved and restored. And there's a really good picture of that. But guess what? It wasn't a tip and it wasn't 300 DPI, and I don't know who I borrowed it from. So it didn't get in the book. But Midland Lumber Mill was a very important part of our business, community. Sorry, Martha, I'm going to blow one more little piece of gossip for the other group. Anyway, but a lot of question about that mill fire. There was a newly hired technician at the mill that looked Germanic. May 1918. A lot of lumber was being used for the shipbuilding industry. And although it's apparently no truth to it whatsoever, there was a lot of speculation that it was sabotaged and burned the mill down because he left town the next day. Well, of course he left town the next day. His job burned down. He was someplace to find a place to work. But, you know, there was a little speculation about that at the time, had something else happen. So, that finishes up chapter 1. Chapter 2, there are some advantages to having, from doing my master's thesis and having very little life and nothing else to do, having read most of the newspapers from 1896 to the present in Minden. You come across some wonderful quotes. There was an editorial in about 1901 in the Minden paper that had this quote that I used for my chapter on church and community. And it was describing Minden. He said, Minden's a town where the shadows of spires are athwart the hearthstones of each home. Now, we always had that a lot of churches. We didn't have that many in 1901. I think he was a little excited, but still. And I thought that was a kind of good verse to sum up community and church, what they meant in Minden. I mean, we always talk about with St. Jude's and all the other things, how we have such a spirit of community, and we know the role that our churches play. So this chapter is essentially images of community activities and churches. So, let's look at a few of those. This one is odd. I'm sorry. Again, it's another faint image. It's one of the ones I had to argue to put in, but I liked it, so you can see it much better in the book. You can see it good up here. It is the 4th of July parade in 1912 in Minden, with a bunch of little girls put up in costumes, apparently Columbia, I don't know, looked like they could be dressed up like the Statue of Liberty. When we first looked at this picture, Shelley pointed out how unhappy they looked. It's July in Minden. I imagine it was a little warm to be wearing all that stuff to be put up in the parade. But even beyond that, it does have a little bit of significance. Some of y'all may be familiar with the story that Vicksburg, and it's not just a story, Vicksburg didn't formally celebrate the 4th of July until World War II. You know, in the South, we weren't exactly happy at the end of the Civil War. And it took about 30 years in Minden. In 1893 or 94, they had a really big picnic on Dorchester. They had a formal 4th of July celebration. So we were already having a 4th of July celebration by 1912, and we had a parade, and we had a float. So, again, civic events, we've always been big on those. We'll talk about Mardi Gras a little bit later on something else, but we have the Mardi Gras parade pictures dating back to the 1890s too. So we always have had big community events. Anyway, I thought that was a very unique picture and I like it a lot. One of the reasons I chose to fight to get it put in the book. This one, this is the original Minden Baptist Church, which was the name. It wasn't the First Baptist Church, it was the Minden Baptist Church until 1923. This house, as it is at this point when you see it, has been converted to a house. Set off what's today the corner of Miller and Broadway, where the Christian Church at Minden, I'm sorry if you attend there, I don't mean that's always a hard thing to say, but we got a lot of Christian churches in Minden. The Christian Church at Minden sits on that corner there. Catholic Church for years and years was on that corner. It was built by, actually it was built by James Morrow. He paid for it, the church took it. The church used it for almost 50 years. And then was converted to a house, and it did not survive the tornado on May 1st, 1933. But this is the point when it was a residence, and it's, put it in there, because I went to First Baptist Church all those years. I want to put something in there, sorry. I couldn't get a good picture of the building I'd like to put. The 1923 building, I couldn't get a good quality DPI image of that, so I put this one in there, and I inserted this in the slideshow because I was short a picture, so here we go. That's what it's there for. St. John's Episcopal. Another one that folks don't believe was ever where it was for a lot of people, because it's hard, you know. I'm old, you know, and when you talk about a church that was gone 8 years before I was around, or so, you know, folks don't ever think it was there. And they don't think of churches being in that, you know, it's a parking lot roughly there now. So, this is St. John's Episcopal. Richard may correct me on this. If Dad were in the country, he could correct me on this. I believe this is the building we had the spat about the windows with Captain Goodwill. It dates from the 1870s. And story basically being that they put in patterned windows, colored stained glass style windows in the building. Captain Goodwill said they were awful. He'd never set foot in the building again. He didn't let his daughter get married in the church because of that. But anyway, the church was built in the 1870s. You can see the back part of Abraham Dow with the family living quarters to the right there. That becomes an important story, and I keep coming back to that. To that lynching story, that becomes an important part of that investigation. But anyway, the Episcopal Church on Back Street, to use the local terminology. And some of these things I put because I can't remember them and I always heard about them. And when I came across a picture of this at LSUS, I said it needs to be in the book. So that's what it's doing there.
Whereabouts on Back Street was that, John?
Between...
Next to the jail.
Well, just on the other side, you had Abraham, I realized this after you came, so I had a hard time doing it.
I was here in the 60s, so I remember.
Okay, Abraham Dow, then you had the jail, then you had this church. The jail, Abraham Dow, and the church. That was the order of the building. So it was just beyond that, between there and the corner, between the service station on the corner, Dixie Overland Station, and Abraham Dow. Okay, this one, I so wanted to attend the live program. Sorry, Ann and Bonnie, I talked to them about it because we'll laugh at this picture, at least from what we can tell. Midland High School baseball team, sometime prior to 1905, in their uniforms and in their traveling clothes, I guess for an away game. Now, this is another picture that I had to fight to get in because it's poor quality. The one I would love to put in the show, but as bad as it is to see this picture, y'all would not have seen it at all. It's in the book. It's of the Fats and Leans baseball game from the middle 1890s. The town divided into two teams. The men in town, one called the Fats, one called the Leans. And somebody asked me, did you get to pick which team you were on? I don't know. Some of us wouldn't give it a choice. Otherwise, you had to pick that out. Now that started when we got tired of getting beaten by Homer in baseball, which I shouldn't say out loud, but that was kind of what was going on. We lost several years and we stopped playing them in the summer game. But anyway, Midland High had a baseball team extremely early. From Will Life's age, how we can tell it was before 1905. So we don't know exactly when the football team started. We know that Harmon Drew, one iteration of Harmon Drew, several back, played football for LSU in 1907 and 1909. Did he play in high school? We don't know. We had several folks 11. No, in 1916 we were playing football. In fact, I know in 1912 we were playing football. But I know that before 1905 we were playing baseball. So it started way back. And that's a fairly early image. Midland High roughly opened 1900, 1901. So it's a fairly early baseball team coming in play from the time. And you can't realize how big baseball is. There's one or two Redbird pictures in there. It's stunning. Of course, I know there wasn't primetime television, and I know there wasn't everything else. When you look back at the crowds that the Redbirds had in the early 1950s in the semi-pro baseball, it's pretty amazing the power baseball had in this area back in those days. This one, again, I can barely remember this pool. I know nothing about my 3 swimming lessons that I took and I failed, I took at Victory Park, so I didn't get to go there. I had friends that took lessons here. But I surely can't remember the slides, but you know, you can't talk about Minden and leave out the story of the Hunters. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I don't know if you can find many towns have a family that contributed to that and have people whose memories are sparked so much by seeing things from Hunter's Pool. I wasn't sure this was Hunter's Pool. This was one of my pictures from LSUS. I came across it and the captain said it was, and the unanimous, not the unanimous opinion, the overwhelming opinion of the folks on Facebook, the elderly folks, and be nasty right now, the folks older than me that can remember, which the way I feel now, be older than me, you've got to be in that category, said it was Hunters. So anyway, that's, you know, you can tell that it was. So anyways, again, vital part of Minden's history, needed to be in there, and I was glad I came across that picture because I had one of Larry and Gladys Hunter in front of the playhouse and a couple other things, but I really didn't have a picture of Hunters like I would like to have, and I was glad I found this one.
Does the building of the playhouse still exist?
Yes.
Somebody moved to it.
It's on Dorchester Road.
I think it was on Dorchester or Biston on one.
On Dorchester Road, it's a residence.
It's right past the Candy Lake store.
Yeah.
Wasn't the road here the slide?
Not being y'all, I can let y'all keep talking. The problem is if I do that, y'all might be the one in the meeting, so I'll get nobody around. I teach school. I'm used to people talking about this. I shouldn't have said that with Bushy Reed. We saw that the time to be in the classroom. Okay, anyway, 1933 tornado. I always found this picture interesting because, again, I don't have any perspective because I'm sitting here right under it. I know you can see it in the picture of the book, but I always liked this one because of right here. That's the roof of the gazebo. Was blown off. This is the Miller and Abnett house. So, City Park was pretty much slaughtered. some of y'all at the Lions Club have got a treat coming, because I've been working a little bit. That makes it really making myself sound officious. I have provided a little bit of information to Joel Martin, who's working on tracking an accurate path of the 33 tornado, and he's going to do a program for the Lions Club in a few weeks here about that. And, he's a meteorologist, and he knows what he's talking about. But it's interesting to see what the the damage the storm did. Devastating event for Midland. That's one of the things he's playing with, is how big was it exactly. He's been pretty impressed with the weather charts. Can you go back and read the weather charts, trying to guess how big that storm really was, because it was a pretty massive storm, did tremendous amounts of damage. But this is part of the impact. That destruction of that gazebo put a little twist in a fairly famous event in Midland history. It had not been rebuilt by November. This was May 1st, 1933. By November, it had not been rebuilt. So when Huey Long came to town and the folks planned to kill him, he had to talk at the courthouse and not in the gazebo. Didn't come off that night anyway, by the way. Huey chickened out. But I stole that story a bit and really quickly tell it to those people that have no idea. Huey was going around the state on a speaking tour, as he always did, and he had been lighting into Harmon Drew, mentioned earlier as being a football player at LSU, at this point a judge, saying all sort of nasty things about him. Word was passed, allegedly. Now, Harmon says it wasn't true, and I think it probably wasn't true. Doesn't match the characters I know of those people. But the story was told that if he's made those same charges in Minden, there were armed people in the crowd, and they were going to take Huey out. Now, the more likely story, what I've been told, is that if he made those charges, then Harmon Drew was going to stand up and say, "You're lying, no, let's get it straight." Anyway, Huey believed it. His bodyguards fanned out in the crowd with their little weapons that they had, and Huey made a really short speech and left. Anyway, what we're rambling on that is, that had to be held at the courthouse. Normally it would have been held at the gazebo, but the gazebo wasn't there yet. They hadn't built it back after this storm. But that's tornado damage on May 1st, 1933, and it's pretty epic, as is this one. Roughly taken, I think it's probably the same fellow taking these pictures. This one was in Quade's collection. First article I ever had published 30 years ago, I used this. And I never knew for sure if it was strictly from Quade's or if it was from Atkinson's. I think it was from Atkinson's. I don't know that for sure. Anyway, looking down toward the Shreveport Road on Broadway, on the left you see the wreckage of the St. Anne's Catholic Church. Now, there are two pictures of St. Anne's Catholic Church in here. I included this one because the other one is in really bad shape. The physical picture itself is in bad shape and it didn't scan as well. But this again gives you the idea of the damage. Everything's kind of leaning. The trees along City Park have been blown over. Now, Ann contacted me about the other picture, and the other picture also relates to a little newsreel we've got playing out here in the museum. One of the stories I'd always been told was that in the wrecked St. Anne's Church that you see right here, by the way, it was St. Anne's until after the storm. When the storm was rebuilt, they renamed it St. Paul's, and I don't know why. I'm trying to find out precisely the decision was made. But anyway, at the front of St. Anne's Church, among the statuary, there were several porcelain or equally fragile statues. And the church was largely blown down around it, and the story was the statues were unbroken. Well, I always heard that as a story. When we were putting the museum together, I was playing on the internet and found newsreel, Minden, and ordered the footage. If you stop and look through at the newsreel, when it shows St. Anne's Catholic Church, as they pan across, it's not there for a long time, you can see some of the statuary standing, looking from outside into the church, standing there unbroken. So, you know, that story was true. We always had those tornado stories to sort out, was it's true. The big debate has always been, was Sam Life picked up in front of Webb Hardware and taken all the way out on East Union? And the idea at the time was he did, because he told them things he couldn't have seen otherwise. The compress was blown down, the cotton gin was flipped over, you know, all these things that he said he'd seen while he was in the air. But you get those stories. My daddy, who was the most honest man I ever knew, swore that they saw a cow go by their house. Their house was picked up and tilted on the block, so, you know, I don't know. You know, but the stories you get out of the tornado, I know now that the statuary, part of it was spared when the church was torn down around it. And that's in St. Anne's there on the left. Okay, chapter 3. We have an amazing heritage in education. Sometimes it's hard to believe, no matter how hard our teachers try. When you make teachers and educators in here, I'm not talking about y'all, I'm talking about sometimes, well, I'll leave that alone. I don't like our governor, because he's my boss. I say no bad things about him otherwise. But we do have an amazing heritage in Louisiana of education. And then we were way ahead of the curve. You know anything about Louisiana history? We essentially didn't have public schools until about 1900 in Louisiana. Minden was one of the exceptions. In 1838, Charles Veeder and the founders asked the legislature to help us establish a school. And in that resolution, where they appropriated $1,500, they said Minden was allowed to erect a building for academic purposes. So, I stole that little phrase for the chapter dealing with schools and government. That particular school opened the Minden Academy on the site of today's Minden High School. The state money was used, it was largely operated as a private school. State money was used to allow indigent or too poor students to get a tuition to come. So it paid to allow students to come to the private school. Well, you know, those things about when we write these constitutional revisions, we're going to improve things. The Louisiana Constitution of 1845 said, no, you can't take public money for private schools. So all those kids that were getting the money to come to the private school got kicked out. Educational progress, I don't know anyway. Schools shut down shortly after that and led to the 2 later schools that we had. But that's where that phrase came from. The phrase that was used in the legislature giving us a special bill. We were one of the first 2 or 3 places in North Louisiana to have a school like that authorized. So we were ahead of the curve. On that site, shortly after that school closed, the Minden Academy closed, came the Minden Female Academy. Now, I sometimes slip up and say these things confused. We had 2 schools. We had the Minden Female Academy, we had the Minden Male. Minden Female College, the Minden Male Academy, excuse me, see I did it right then. They opened at roughly the same time. With a little bit of exception, the Minden Male Academy was where Academy Park is. The Drake family donated the land. The original name of the academy was named after Mahala Drake. It was the Mahala Academy, and they changed it to the Minden Male Academy. And we had the female college and the male academy operating at either point on College Street. Fitting name, that's where the name College Street comes from. This was the Minden Female College from 1850 until the college went broke in about 1892 or 1893. Went through another couple of hands, and in 1900, when Minden began operating a public school, the Minden High School, public school, opened in these buildings. They were not in good shape. In 1906, C.A. Ives, who for many years was Dean of Education at LSU, came to Minden to be hired as principal. And during his interview, the committee was interviewing him. And they said, well, Professor Ives, what do you think we should do about our buildings? He said, I think you should burn them down. And at the time, he found out later that 2 of the women on the committee had graduated from that college, and they weren't happy to hear that. But anyway, I mentioned this because I posted this picture, actually, the color version of this image, on Facebook last week, and somebody said, what a shame we tore it down. I think in this case it was a had to. I'll say more about that in just a minute. But it was used very well for 50 years. The concert hall is over to the right. You can't see much of it. There's a bell by the concert hall. All big meetings in town, all the important events were held there. And it was a fairly amazing school when you look at the curriculum. My favorite Minden Female College story, though, is that women's lib is not a new idea. maybe it's not entirely a bad idea. Fred Cabinets came across on eBay years ago a set of the newspapers from the female college. And they cover the period 1860 and 1861. And there is an editorial in 1861, right after secession, written by one of the young ladies at the female college. They didn't sign their name.
My grandmother went to that school. My grandmother.
Yep. Didn't sign the name, so we don't know who wrote it. And she basically was saying, if you read the issues in December 1860, they were going, we can't believe we'll have a war. We can't believe we'll be fighting against our flag. Can't these people work out a better solution? They come back to school in February, and she let them have it. She said, look, here's what we've come to. This horrible war, all this death, all this destruction, and they won't let us vote. We could fix this situation. So anyway, but what I was saying when I started that little ramble is the curriculum was amazing. The subject that they taught was a really good education at that college. So, as I said, CAIs had already told you burn them down. So one of his first projects was to get with the folks in town and have a bond issue passed. And that led to the construction of this building. Started in 1909, occupied in 1910. This is prior to occupation, obviously, no landscaping. The building that was used, again, back to the lost Minden thing. How long was this building around? 45 years. When you think about how long things were around, it's just hard to imagine. I mean, I sit here and think about, I'm still with the brain set having gone to Lowe, that Lowe is, quote, a relatively new school. Lowe's 54 years old. This building only got to be 45, you know, when you look at it. So, but it was there. A lot of memories for a lot of folks in Minden.
I went there.
3-story building. As I mentioned before, in some of my writings, led to that most confusing thing I ever had told me at E.S. Richardson Elementary was go to the basement. And then I found out that the bathroom, that old building went to the basement, and my teachers had taught me that building. And that's what they were used to saying, that you went to the basement. I tried to figure for years how a basement meant bathroom. But that was what it was coming from. So anyway, again, I never saw this building. It was gone before I was here, and I was always fascinated by it. You know, it's a beautiful building, beautiful architectural building. Again, if you helped plan this building, I'm sorry, but my God couldn't do anything about the courthouse that we've got. I'm sorry. I don't like that architectural stuff. It needs to be done. But anyway, beautiful building, and you know, I'm sure a lot of memories for folks that went to school there, because it was there for a long time. I know my 20s. My dad went there. My mother didn't go there. She came after later. She didn't go to the grades here.
My dad had taught there.
Did he? I didn't realize that. That's a
6th grade.
So, we have this building. Now, in this building, we have great tragedy. Did an interview with Red River Radio last week, and the lady asked me one picture that I thought really was special for Minden. And after I thought about it a while, I said, I think this may be it. The picture was taken on the afternoon of February 13th, 1923. It was rehearsal for the Mardi Gras pageant to be held that night in the auditorium of the 1910 Minden High School. That night, during the performance, there were sparklers being carried by little girls. They ignited the dresses, and at the end, 6 to 7 little girls died from that fire. Minden really didn't celebrate Mardi Gras for about town-wide for about 50 years after that. The big celebrations went away. That seemed like a morbid thing to say that I think it was symbolic of Minden in a lot of ways, but the community spirit, because Mardi Gras was such a big deal when you read those papers. The whole town, kind of like we are now for the festivals and things that we have. To put a plug in for one of my earlier books, one of my books was called Minden Perseverance and Pride. Well, we didn't forever go away from it. We came back. After years and years, we came back to having Mardi Gras celebrated again. But this picture came to me from Cynthia Garrison Payne. I believe that Jamie Garrison is in the picture. I believe she was in the pageant. If I recall correctly. I think that's where Cynthia had it from. It's another one that I had to argue to get put in the book because it's not the best quality. But it is a moment frozen in time. I mean, 5 hours later, roughly after this world they lived in, literally their world ended for some of these little girls, and then the whole people, the way the town operated, the whole thing ended in a lot of ways after this event. And that was in that 1909, 1910 MHS building. They moved up to this one. I went to this one, so I feel a little better about this one. This was the 1924 Minden High School. First building built strictly just to be a high school. This is shortly after the opening. No landscaping, no groundwork around it. Served as the high school alone for quite a few years. Served as a junior high, then served as part of the high school.
Molly Bullock and Sadie Reynolds.
And Carlton and I can show you which windows were in our room.
Yeah.
We both taught it that.
Yeah, when I remember you being, at one point, you were down on the first floor at one point when I was there.
I was down in the counselor's room.
Yeah.
I
Anyway.
started upstairs to the left where the library used to be.
And this building, of course, there was talk of saving when we went to build the other one, and it just was, I was a little bit privy to those conversations. And since I'm saying those awful things about tearing things down, there just was economically no way we could save this one. It just was, they couldn't have got the money. I mean, that's an opinion. Maybe I can say that. Martha's not happy when I say that. Well, yeah, but some people would have had to put money on it, might not have wanted to. That's the thing about it.
Some people would have had to got rid of the thousands of bats that lived in.
Well, yeah. And then, of course, the other theory, as I had explained to me, some of you people that are at Minden High may know better, the problem with the flooding started when they built the 1954 Minden High, was my understanding. Because one of my fond memories of being a freshman at Minden High School was sandbagging the basement of this building where it was flooding. You know, that was going on with that. But anyway, this building lasted 78, 79 years. So it was around for a little bit longer.
Well, it was about the same time as Burn High School, wasn't it? Built about the same time.
Roughly the same time, largely the same pattern.
And they say Burn High School.
Somdahl Associates were our architects over here. That was E.S. Richardson's architects. Because it was a trivia question I used to ask my students at Sibley. What did the White House and Sibley High School have in common? Same architect worked on them. Because the Somdahl firm worked on the White House when Truman was president and worked on the buildings that Richardson built. Yeah, it's my grandfather worked on Byrd High School, but that's another story. Anyway, yeah, roughly the same time frame, same time period. Yeah.
Restored Burn High School.
Yeah, they did. That's right.
Got rid of the.
Good point.
Well, the problem, you know, I know about it as mad as me, but the problem, Byrd High School has been taken care of all those years. That's the thing, you can walk to Byrd High School right now, it's like it never was even in. Minden High School had not been taken care of, the beams underneath that building were completely deteriorated. That building would have taken more money to fix than it would have been to build new buildings. And it's just not economic. I mean, I know y'all want to keep it, I want to keep it, I went to school there. But you couldn't, I promise you, you could not have built that building or fixed that building back. You were close to the amount of money that you're going to take to rebuild. I mean, I know y'all know more about it, but I promise you, it was not economical.
Butch was my boss, and he was very good to me, so I don't want to go back to that. Get off this slide. And this one, 1872 Webster Parish Courthouse, the first Webster Parish Courthouse. Sat on the lot where for one generation was the post office. For my generation was People's Bank. For this generation is whatever the heck the bank's name it is this week. Capital One, I guess, anyway. You know, again, water problems, drainage problems. You can't see it in this picture, I'm sure, up on the screen. But you'll notice from the picture of the book, I think you can tell a little better, all the ruts going off was a bad drainage problem. That problem persisted. I know Ms. Lester knows about what went through with the old post office, the downstairs on it, built on that same site. I'm saying all that to say I guess it was justified for tearing it down. The building was apparently in bad shape. I got really frustrated though, first time I went to Washington, Arkansas. When you're talking about buildings looking the same, if you look at their roughly 1872, 1873 courthouse, I'm sure the same fellow built that one that built this one. They look very similar. And when I think about this building being gone after only 30 years, I kind of wondered. But then I read how many problems they were having about it. They had problems from the first day. When they opened it up, they didn't buy enough spittoons. And the first police jury meeting after they opened, they had to get extra spittoons because the floor was being ruined anyway. So it had problems to start with, but seriously, it had structural problems from the first. And so we had to replace it. But I was sitting there thinking about that in Washington that day because they have the several courthouses, and I'm going, well, let's see. Our 1872 courthouse is gone. Our 1905 courthouse is gone. And again, I'm going to reiterate the thing the book said. Maybe some of our things are lost because we didn't take care of them. Boy, I don't know anyway. This building had problems. 1905 Webster Parish Courthouse / later City Hall. Problems, talk about the first problems. Look in the dome where you see the clock. Clock stopped working around 1920. And the dome perpetually leaked. And at the time the tornado came, there was a big brouhaha going on in Minden over do we want to knock the dome off and put a flat roof so we won't have a leaking roof. Tornado didn't blow the dome off, it did damage it a little bit, but they decided after that they would fix it, and it got to look more like I remember it, and of course by the end it's boarded up on those little sections. But there were a lot of problems. I was never in this building except to pay the light and water bill for Mama, so I don't know a whole lot about it. I've heard about the round courtroom. Hey, that's a unique thing we could have had. I wish, again, if it boiled down to losing this for that one little street, it's really, really sad. But anyway, I don't want to rant on that. That's not the purpose of the book. I lost Minden. But it is, you know, again, as I said, if anybody here served on the 1954 courthouse committee, I apologize. But boy, either one of these looks so much better than what we've got now. Bad architectural period as far as I'm concerned. But anyhow, this building has a lot of memories for a lot of folks because it was around for 65 years. And it did serve, you know, in the center of town there, served a lot of purposes. As I told Bonnie, in the edge of this picture, you can see a teenage picture of the tree, which, you know, as Bonnie told me that she had found out, it's not Arizona ash. We've been wrong all these years. Somebody came and looked at it and said it's not that. But anyway, it's an ash. So whatever it's called, the pretty tree. You know, pretty tree got planted when the courthouse was built in 1905. So this picture is taken shortly after that. It says 1905 is the date of the courthouse. This is a postcard. I think the date on the postcard is 1910, so it was before 1910, but anyway. And it's how the courthouse started out, the clocks in the top. It never worked. We wanted, by the way, hey, that's a project for later on. From 1900 to 1903, there was a big argument that we needed a town clock. And they jumped on Minden Baptist Church because they were about to build their brand new church and said, y'all need to build a church with the clock tower until the town will have a clock. And one paper, the Webster Signal, said, no, don't you dare build a clock. And the Minden Democrats said, yeah, you do build a clock. And they were going at each other. And then that kind of led to the clock being put in the courthouse. But anyway, that's the 1905 Webster Parish Courthouse. And at that point, this is when I hear the rustling and the slamming of books normally on weekdays. Because that's in my presentation. Now, as I said, there's 180 pictures in the book.
So
I would love to have shown all of them, but as I said,
John, how old are you saying that ash tree is?
it is roughly 110 years old, 1905. When they built the courthouse, and they was, you know, that was.
You'll notice that the ash tree has been trimmed. We trimmed it.
Yeah.
The first time it's been trimmed in years.
Yeah.
But we had people from the How about you,
Yeah,
Aggie?
that's who told Bonnie. Bonnie was working, talking about it being trimmed. She called me to find out about a picture of it, whatever else. She said, you know, it's not Arizona ash. And I said, no, I don't know. Tree's a tree to me. I'm
That's what
sorry.
it was always called, but the ag people said that's not an Arizona ash.
Yeah, yeah.
It's an ash tree.
John, wasn't it 33 that half the town burned and they said one end burned, the other end blew away, it's
I
broken?
heard it several different ways. I used it in the paper. I wrote that the north end burned, the south end blew away, and the middle of it broke.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the Goodwill store block burned. Then oh, I forgot that. By the way, I was supposed to tell y'all that there was one picture I needed to find for this show, and I could not find. Minden's first sewage ditch was Prothero Creek. Prothero Creek.
John, I just want to thank the job you do, keeping up with the history of this town, because, you know, it's just, if it wasn't for you, we would have near about what we have here. I know I dealt with right stuff with history of West Paris education.
Yeah, I've used some of it. I know. I
I
stole
know
some
you
of
had
it.
stripped a lot of it, and it was, you know, just amazing the information you collected from that. And I just appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
Keep on doing it.
Go on, do it. Yeah.
And so that courthouse, I guess probably all y'all realize, but, when it was torn down, you could buy a room and you could go in and tear it down yourself if we would pay for that. And I know we did some of
Yeah,
that.
we bought a room.
And, you know.
We found out when we bought it,
Another
we
building.
found out when we bought it, we was gonna renovate one of our places down there, Kim's. The 2x4s were really 2x4s. They weren't the same size 2x4s they are now, so we couldn't use them.
Yeah, because it was built when the lumber company was going full blast, so I'm sure they had a ready lumber supply there, I think.
It used to be like at noon, some kind of clock, or noise. You don't know where that clock came from. That's a church. That's a church.
Yeah, two different churches have done it at different times, yeah. Different churches have done it at different times, but I wouldn't want to say for sure, but yeah.
Yeah, noon, it's
The ash tree was planted by friends of Charlie Davis because the sun bringing it down and disturbed it. So they put the tree there.
Yeah, he was deputy sheriff at that point, so he was in the building, you know, so yeah. Again, my sister gets so angry because she cannot stand Facebook, and I have no life, so I'm on there all the time. But when I put that picture on Facebook, some relative of them came forward and said, my great whatever planted that tree. Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Some of the relatives that told us.
You already dismissed. Shelley, everything.